I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello! It is a beautiful fake spring day here where I live. And what is fake spring, you ask? Let me tell you. Fake spring is a day in March where the temperature hits about 55 degrees or higher and the sun even shines. It feels like a miracle after days on end of cold and snowy weather. We shuck off our coats, dig out the shorts, and expose our pasty white legs to the world without so much as a hint of embarrassment. Not even a hint. We open the windows for fresh air, and in many cases, the outdoor temperature is warmer than the inside of the house. True old house problems. You know what I'm talking about. And even though we all know it's fake spring, we just can't help ourselves from engaging in just ridiculously premature tasks like putting the snow shovels away, scrubbing the porches, or even firing up the lawnmower to see if it still works. One year, I was out for a walk on a fine fake spring day, and I saw, and it still gives me a chuckle, I saw someone skimming the leaves out of their swimming pool. Something about that man's unshakable optimism has really stuck with me through the years. Tomorrow, it's going to be 20 degrees colder. A few days after that, there will be snow again. Our real spring weather is still 5 to 6 weeks away. But for this one glorious day in March, we will forget all about that, and we will squeeze every single drop out of this gift of a day that we have been given. So if you're experiencing real spring, I am so jealous. But if you get fake spring like we do, I sincerely hope that you were able to enjoy every minute of that special day. So outside of the weather, not much is going on here at Blake Hill House. I am still deeply entrenched in the staircase restoration project, and all updates are over on my blog, blakehillhouse.com. So if you're interested, you can always catch up on my projects over there. All right, announcements. I have an announcement about something that's coming right up in April. And I'm just going to read this because the name of this organization is kind of a mouthful, but it's the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America and the Smithsonian Institution. They're hosting a 3-day celebration of women and their pivotal role in American preservation. This event is April 5th through 7th, and it's virtual. Now, the event is free, but you must register to attend, and I'll put a link right in the show notes. So here's a description. I'm going to just read directly from the flyer, and it says, join us for 3 days of dynamic discussions with more than 30 scholars, museum professionals, and powerful everyday advocates. Sounds great to me. So if you're part of a nonprofit with an upcoming event that you would like for me to announce on the show, please send me the details via the contact form on the True Tales from Old Houses website. All right, now it is time for Q&A, and I have invited a friend to help me out. Let's see who's here today.
Hello.
It's Lindsay from Blind Eye Restoration. Thank you for coming back today.
Of course, always.
It's fun to have you do this Q&A segment with me. So we've done an interview this season, but you're a professional, and I thought I need Lindsay's input on this question. So Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. The question that a listener sent to us is, or to me, and I'm asking you to help me out, is what is your favorite modern product for old house restoration?
Yeah. So I think something that's really cool from modern systems is a heated floor. We have a lot of problems with introducing new systems, new heating systems to old houses. A lot of times we have to build ducting and just weird blobs that end up showing in rooms that didn't used to have them. And heated floors are a really great way of adding heat to an entire space without introducing any kind of new visual feature that would detract from the historic integrity. It's really great for house museums that are able to install it, and even personally in historic homes.
Mm-hmm. So that requires electricity, I guess. I've seen it. It's a grid. You kind of lay it out, and then you can tile over it or whatnot. And it does require some electricity. So is that something that ties into the existing circuit in like a bathroom, or do you have to run new electricity? It's not a plug-in. I mean, it's automatically, it's kind of hardwired. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a hardwired system. You can get installers for it, but the the installation of it isn't so bad. You can actually run it underneath from the basement. I think, old house guy. Oh no. Oh, I'm terrible. Alex from,
Yeah.
he did one recently through his stories. You could watch him putting it in from his basement. He could actually reach up to the bottom of the floor in his downstairs, and he just ran it all the way around there and then insulated over top of it in his basement ceiling when he was redoing the space down there. So you could watch the whole thing. And it was really just about like evenly spacing and running it back and forth and having, having the material.
What was the floor above it? It was
the wood floor, I think.
It was the wood floor. And you know what? That's so smart because, I can actually see my upstairs, through my basement because we don't have a subfloor. My hardwood is just laid right on top of it. So
same. Yeah. After he did it, I was definitely like, I wonder.
Yeah, never thought about
that.
That's a great idea. I wonder if that would work too. I have one of our rooms upstairs hangs over an outdoor space that gets really cold. So I'm super curious whether you could almost do it on that floor of that outdoor space and keep everything from getting so cold upstairs. I don't know.
That could be a really good idea.
Something to pursue.
I'm definitely planning on doing it on my back porch edition. That is a bathroom mudroom space. So the foundation, it's a foundation, but it's not a heated foundation space over my primary house.
Right.
And so it gets really cold out there regardless. And so we're really excited to put that in soon.
Good idea. That's a really good idea. All right. Well, my favorite product, hands down, and I haven't used nearly as many products as you have as a professional, but my favorite product is the Abitron wood epox and liquid wood. I really like that stuff. My climate, your climate too, incredibly harsh. So a lot of those products that you can use for epoxies, I find just over time because of the expansion and contraction of wood, they just pop out or they shed paint or whatever. And I really like the wood epoxy and liquid wood. This is not, I guess it's technically an advertisement for them, but I'm not getting paid for this advertisement for them. But it stands up so well and it really stays put in paints. And so that I would choose that as my very favorite modern product.
I like the filler putty epoxy.
Yes.
The liquid wood kind of acts as a hardener for the base wood.
Right.
That you attach the wood epox onto. And the wood epox, I love. It's great 3-dimensional. You can really reshape a corner of something.
Yes. I built a foot on a desk, one of those little, I just rebuilt one. It was missing. So I just used wood epox and I built a little foot and it looks good as new.
It's really light. And as long as you not necessarily, I don't know, was it holding a lot of weight, the foot?
No.
I've never tested it. It's structural integrity.
No, basically I was building toes on a foot. So the foot was there and I rebuilt the toes. So I guess I
Gotcha.
Gave myself too much credit there.
Still sculpting with that stuff is still a trick. Yeah. It's a great product. There's a bunch of neat epoxies out there. My right-hand lady, Morgan, she actually did a study of epoxies in her school education program, where she tested a bunch of different ones. And it's been really fun to look at which ones we like better for things that are more 3-dimensional, things where we need something more structural. There's this stuff called architectural restoration technology, I think, ART. I call it art epoxy. And it's a little stickier. It's almost like working with peanut butter, but it gets so hard and it's still sandable, but it's not as smooth sandable as wood epox. The wood epox is definitely the most user-friendly for sure.
Right. Did Morgan publish that paper or anything anywhere that somebody could read it? That sounds like a really interesting article.
She did in her school journal, and I'm really trying to get her to put it on our blog.
Yeah. If that happens, let me know because I would love to link it and love to read it. And of course, if I pass any information along, I would certainly reference Morgan and Blind Eye Restoration.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll let you know.
All right. Thanks for answering this question with me today. It's always good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Now it is your turn. This season, I have a question for you as a listener, and it is, what is the weirdest or most surprising thing you ever found in your old house? And I got a few answers to the question via the contact form on the website, and I'm going to read those to you, or tell you more about them today. So the first anecdote is from Alyssa, and I kind of feel like maybe I should give a trigger warning for this one. So I'm going to tell you, if you don't like snakes, you might want to cover up your ears for the next minute and a half. Turn the volume down if you're driving in the car. I'll give you just 1 second. Here it is. All right, so here's the scoop. Alyssa lives in a circa 1790s brick colonial. And when she moved in, they found 3 5-foot-long black snakes in the attic and the basement. And she said they first realized they had the snakes because they found the long snake skins that the snakes had shed and left behind. Can you even imagine? Oh, my goodness. So they finally found the snakes. It was probably 3 months after they're moving in, and they don't have any idea how long they were there before they caught them. And it's also really unclear whether those snakes entered the house from the ground level and made their way up to the attic via the cavities in the wall, or if they scaled the outside of the house and entered through the attic and then made their way to the basement. Kind of creepy. Like I said, if you don't like snakes, that's not the story for you. But this next one I thought was super interesting, and it comes from Christina. And her story would make an excellent plot for a historical time-traveling novel or something similar. And I'm going to read it to you word for word because Christina explains it best. She writes, I am an investigator for the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB. We are the federal agency which protects the rights of workers to form and join unions, among other rights. My husband and I own a 1901 Victorian, which we have been renovating. This past summer, while renovating a bedroom, we found an old piece of homework in the walls, and the homework had the name Dorothy Mirgay. We looked up census records that listed her father as Albin Mirgay, and they were listed at our address. And here's the fun connection. Albin Mirgay was the subject of a 1939 NLRB case. Albin had been fired from his job for trying to organize a union, and the NLRB found that his termination was unlawful and ordered that he be reinstated with full back pay. And then she ends with this. She says, it's funny to think that my agency helped a family living in my house long before I walked this earth. I agree 100%. I mean, if that is not a tale of coincidence, then I don't know what is. I want to hear your answers all season, so please visit the True Tales from Old Houses website. On the bottom right-hand side, you will see a microphone icon. Click on that microphone and you can leave a voicemail answer, which I might share on an upcoming episode of the show. Please answer in a complete sentence and don't be shy. You can leave the voicemail using your phone or even your computer as long as it has a microphone. Your privacy is important, so rest assured that any messages you leave will not be shared without your permission. Thank you, Alyssa and Christina, for taking the time to answer the question about the weirdest or most surprising thing you ever found in your old house. Before I begin the interview with today's guest, Scott Sidler, I need to say a word. This season, the Craftsman Blog is a financial supporter of True Tales from Old Houses. What that means is that Scott's company has paid to have a commercial during an episode. That financial contribution does not give him or his company creative or content control over the show in any way. Since commercials are new on True Tales from Old Houses, I just want to be as transparent as possible about how this works and how it's going to work moving forward. I also like to keep the FTC happy so that I can keep bringing the show to you. They could be a little prickly about this sort of thing. All right, so cat's out of the bag. Scott Sidler is here today, and rather than a long intro, let's just jump right into it.
I am Scott Sidler. I'm the owner of Austin Historical and the Craftsman Blog, where we teach people how to restore old houses.
Excellent. Well, hi, Scott. Welcome back to True Tales from Old Houses.
It's so good to be here again. Good to see you.
Well, it is always a pleasure to tap into your expertise to share with my listeners and get to see you again. It's great. I see you on Instagram. I see you on Facebook, but rarely face to face. So it's
yeah,
good.
Instagram's so fun. It's a great way to I feel like it's an easy way to connect with people in this little cottage industry of people fixing up old houses. And there's a lot of people sharing great stuff. So it's a lot of fun.
I think so too. I was thinking to myself the other day that when I first met you and I thought, oh gosh, we had like zero professional relationship. We didn't know each other at all. And it's so much fun on Instagram now that I think people tag you, they tag me at the same time. And
totally. Yeah. I was like, I always see the stuff. It's like, okay, I've got this problem. Blake Hill House at Craftsman Blog. What do we do? Like, well, we'll figure it out. It's like, I like the hive mind kind of crowdsourcing thing that you can do on Instagram.
Right. I don't know. I've never told you this story before, but when we did meet in person, we were at the, why did it just escape me? This is the kind of morning that I'm having. But we met at the window restoration workshop in Florida.
Brooksville, Florida.
That's right.
I forget the name of the house that was there.
It was the May Stringer
House. That's right.
Yeah.
All the houses down here, all the historic houses. Have you noticed they all have two names?
Hyphen. Yeah.
Yeah. We've worked on the Walker Hendry house, the Moat Morris house. It's like it's not like the Jones house. Like I never see that. It's always two names for some strange reason.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it was a funny thing because we stayed in the same hotel, I remember, and we went in and there was this breakfast there and it was a buffet and the place was empty except for you. And I had this total high school moment like, oh my gosh, do I go sit with Scott? Like, is it weird that we have breakfast together?
Not weird at all. It's good stuff. Yes.
It's not. I was just thinking 2 years later, 3 years later, what was I thinking? But it is funny how, you just get to know somebody better. So anyway, Thank you. All that chit chat out of the way. But we've done episodes before and you've done some general Q&A during your previous visits. But we're going to really dive in and sort of drill down on paint and primer talk, as well as your new window restoration course, because I'm really interested in hearing about that. We'll get to that part. But a lot of people ask me about paint. And what I've kind of discovered is that, after the hours of painstaking prep and the priming and painting should feel like the reward, but it can be really overwhelming to decide what to use. And I feel like every tradesperson has their favorite. I may be wrong. I may be misinterpreting this. But when you have a favorite, that gets interpreted into this is the right way and the other ways are wrong. And I don't know, it's kind of a he said, she said situation. So I thought maybe we could talk about it and...
Absolutely. Painting it, that's one of the questions I get the most too is, well, what's the best paint for this? Or how should I paint it? It's like painting advice, everybody has an opinion. It's just like, getting in the car with a different driver and you're like, why are you driving like that? Some people make you nervous. Some people are super cautious. It's like, but most people are able to get to where they want to go and it's fine. And I don't know that there are certainly some wrong things to do when painting, but I don't know that there's all the advice out there that we all say, well, this is how I do it. So anybody who does it other than that is wrong. I don't know about that. They're just different from what you do. And it may be a little bit better or a little bit worse, but there is a ton of information and questions about painting. And it just seems like it's a never ending hole that people can just go down and start researching and never come up with an answer.
Right.
Because there's no one answer, I would say, for most of these topics. There are better primers to use, better paints to use. I think we all kind of agree on paint prep. Like there's certain things that you just have to do. Like if you don't scrape off that flaking paint, then you're going to have problems with it. If you don't deal with some of the surface preparation, you're going to have problems. But most paints today are pretty resilient, and you can, there are some obviously mistakes you can make, and we can certainly talk about some of those pitfalls to run into. But
okay, all right.
I don't think people should be quite as worried about, well, I'm doing it different than this pro recommends or this pro, because both pros are going to argue with each other, and they both are professional painters, so it's fine.
Right, exactly. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about I have some terminology I wanted to ask you about.
Yes.
So the first thing, like paints and primers, a lot of times are compatible with each other across the brands. And I kind of feel like linseed paint is in a class by itself. Would you agree with that or disagree? Or
I would absolutely agree. I think linseed oil paints, this is what paint was hundreds of years ago. This was the simplest version of it, is some kind of dry pigment mixed in with linseed oil, and that's how you would apply it. That was the basics for paint. And then we started adding different things in. The pigments would change, like we'd use white lead to get the white colors, and the liquid pigments and things like that too. But linseed oil paint works well on linseed oil. Primer, like if you're going to prime, there are only a couple of linseed oil primers, but you usually don't even need a primer with linseed oil paint. It just goes directly onto the substrate. I've experimented and used it a little bit down here, but I generally don't use it because I live in Florida, the mildew capital of the world, and linseed oil paint has a real tendency to mildew. Even there are some brands that are made, Allback and Viking make some that are, supposedly much more resistant to mildew. I think sometimes they say that it's mildew free, but I've still seen them mildew after a few years because linseed oil has protein and protein is food for mildew. So they've tried to remove and negate some of that protein, but they're kind of a unique paint. Have you ever used them?
Well, no, I've been playing around, but I have kind of the same problem with mildew up here. We have you're much hotter, quicker humidity, but we have, we're not Alaska, let me tell you, but you know how things you might have heard in Alaska where they have this, 2-month growing season. So things just explode. They go from there's nothing and then they have these giant, almost prehistoric looking plants. There's a little bit of that going on here too. So we can go from 0 to 100 in 3 months, and then
mildew
you just have
bloom
to
everywhere.
Yes. So it happens really fast here, and things don't dry out because we also have hot days, but we have cold nights, and then you might get a week and a half of rain. I mean, we're always fighting, and nature always wins.
She does. She wins. Our whole goal is to try and keep her at bay as long as we can and maintain these houses. So, one of the cool things about linseed oil paint is, like, especially if you're glazing windows, you can use linseed oil putty and glaze it and then go grab your paintbrush and paint it immediately. So that's really nice that you don't have to worry about skinning over of the putty or anything like that. They're totally compatible. If you're using a linseed oil putty, if you're using a different kind of putty, not so compatible. But you also have the advantage of sometimes you'll have to put a few coats of paint on if you're doing linseed oil. It usually goes on a little bit thinner, or at least it soaks into the wood a bit too. And you usually get a glossy finish. There aren't a lot of matte or satin finishes with linseed oil. It just is glossy. And then one of the advantages, I think, is that instead of having to repaint, and it doesn't create like a paint film, like how we do, you peel the paint off of something with a latex or even an oil-based, linseed oil is more of a breathable paint film. So you don't get that kind of like bubbling up kind of paint issues. You'll also be able to maybe 5 years later come back and just brush on some linseed oil, and it will kind of re-emulsify the paint, the pigments, and kind of give the paint an extra, like, extend its life. So nice. as it fades, as you lose some of that glossiness, you can come back with just raw linseed oil, or whatever the manufacturer is recommending to come back with, because some of them have their own special linseed oils. But you don't have to like sand it, prime it, and paint it again. It's just reapply paint and paint and paint over the years. So it's kind of nice like that.
Yeah. So linseed oil paints, they're both interior and exterior. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, they can be applied. Most of them, right? Every manufacturer has their specifics, but in general, linseed oil paint is for inside or outside.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. I have a quick question for you that's somewhat related to linseed oil and priming. I do have another term I want to ask you about, but as far as rabbits go, another really debatable thing, rabbit in windows, not bunny rabbits, but
there's a lot of debate about those kind of rabbits too.
Yeah. So do you prime your rabbits, or do you just brush linseed oil? I guess you're in the mildew capital, so you may not use linseed.
I do. I use, so it usually depends. So like our common, at Austin Historical, we pretty much prime our rabbits all the time. There may be occasions where we're just going to come out, somebody has a broken piece of glass, and we'll just come out really quickly, and we'll just bring a little rag dipped in boiled linseed oil, rub it into the rabbit, and then reglaze that window in those cases. But if we're, for a window restoration, we're usually going to prime the rabbits to seal them so that it doesn't just draw all the oils out of the putty.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I kind of put the cart before the horse there, but I thought, well, that was a good time. We could ask that. All right. So my next question for you is let's define the term alkyd. Now, it was my understanding that alkyd used to just mean basically oil paint was alkyd.
Yeah. So usually alkyd, so you've on the market today, depending on whether you live in California or not, you won't see them on the market. But
we're going to get there
states,
too.
Yes. Most states you can still find acrylic or alkyd paints. And alkyd paints, now you can get into, you could go deep down this layer of like water paint back, thing, because there's epoxies, there's urethanes, not just like a polyurethane, but you can have a urethanized paint, a urethanized acrylic. There's even one that Sherwin-Williams makes that I think is like a acrylic alkyd urethane. And you're like, I don't know how you mix all three of those together, but somehow they have figured out how to do that.
Okay, well, let me stop you for just a second then. Let's do okay, I was going to pause, long pause, dead air. All right, so I was going to say, let's talk about what alkyd used to mean, and then maybe talk about these modern alkyds. I know, Sherwin-Williams has one, Benjamin Moore has one, probably most of the big companies are having one, using one now. And they have alkyd on the paint label. So maybe that's where you could clarify the difference for us. We're not here. We can talk about specific brands of paint. They're not, just to make it clear, they don't pay us to talk about these. They're just kind of things that we all use a lot, the different brands. So go ahead. That's fine.
So an alkyd paint, basically, if you see alkyd, you can assume that it's an oil-based paint. Okay. There are various forms of it, but it is... I am a little bit of a science nerd on stuff like that, so I know it's a polyester modified with fatty acids. I remember seeing that. I was like, okay, but that doesn't mean anything to me for how I paint. But basically, if you see an alkyd paint, it's an oil-based paint, which means that you're going to have some kind of solvent. In any paint, there's a solvent. So in linseed oil paint, that was the linseed oil. In acrylic paints, it's water. In alkyd paints, it's paint thinner, mineral spirits. There are some that use different thinners like xylene or whatever, but it's basically that there is a solvent that is not water for most people's purposes, and that is what evaporates out. So you're getting an alkyd paint. Some of the advantages of alkyd paints, they provide like usually a very hard finish. They're slow drying. So, that was the stuff that people used to paint trim and woodwork with and windows, because it would take 8 hours to dry, 24 hours to recoat, most cases, and it would lay down really nice. And you get this super, no brush marks, super smooth surface. They really are beautiful, and they're really not sticky when they dry. So an alkyd paint, that's one of the big advantages, like really hard enamels are typically alkyds. And most oil-based paints that people still will use on things like cabinets and woodwork and things like that, where you don't want paint blocking. And that's, you close a door up against the jamb and you open it and you feel that and you see the two colors like sticking together, like that's from acrylics. That's a problem we have now that we didn't, right? Like it was perfect. It's beautiful. And I just don't even want to close the door.
Right.
But alkyds don't stick to each other like acrylics do. And that's one of the main reasons I think that people still use alkyds today, because they're harder to work with.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Not available in California. And I think there are several states where they're not available anymore. I was trying to look up a list, but that information kind of, I think it was 2005 or something when there was a big shift. And I think slowly other states have come on board and decided not to sell these oil-based products. So now we have something called a modern alkyd, which is a term that's been floating around. So that it can't be all oil. So it must be a mixture of something else. And so why don't you tell us a little bit more about those? Yeah,
you'll see them usually called acrylic alkyds.
Okay.
Which a lot of places, Sherwin-Williams, Benmore, a lot of those companies have those kinds. I haven't seen them being used too much outdoors. I think Benmore has one that's their advanced line that only the high gloss you can use outdoors. The rest of them are interior only. So it's a newer technology. But somehow they have figured out how to take that alkyd paint and suspend it in an acrylic formula, in a water-based cleanup formula. So you thin with water-based things like Floetrol, you thin with water, you clean up with water. And as the water evaporates, it essentially, the way I understand it, and I could be wrong on this, but this is what my paint reps have told me. Essentially, as the water evaporates, it releases the alkyd that paint flows out as an alkyd. So it's a much lower VOC version, which is why these states have problems with these paints and they've limited them, not because they had bad performance or anything, but because the VOC content, which volatile organic compounds, basically the smell, all the fumes, is too high on these compared to acrylics.
Right.
And so I've used them and I find that I get that really nice hard finish with it. So I use them on woodwork and things like that a lot. The only challenge is I just haven't found a good one for exterior yet. And so I have to think it's coming down the line if they've figured out how to do them as like partially exterior. And I don't know why the sheen changes something with their formulations, but the higher gloss stuff can be used outside, but all the rest of it is only interior.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm a fan. I really like them too. I think they mimic the oil paints a lot, but the cleanup is so much easier.
Oh, so much easier. It's really a pain. I think about my grandfather was a painter, and I think about how he had to clean up everything. We still use oil-based primers in our shop, and it's just
Same.
more to clean up. It's a better primer. They haven't figured out a latex primer that's as good and doesn't penetrate as well. And so that's what we use. And for me, paint, it's all about the performance. I would rather have no VOCs. I would rather have easy cleanup. But if it's only going to last a couple years, then why am I doing that? I'll use the better product, the older technology, if they haven't figured out how to make the new stuff as good.
Right. And I can totally understand that from a professional standpoint too, because you don't want to have to go back and keep repeating the work or have the homeowner do it. And from a DIY standpoint, I have so much work to do already. I don't need to double or triple or quadruple any amount of work that I have because there's always a backlog.
No, it's awful. Rework is the most expensive thing we do as a company. Warranty calls like, oh, this is rotting. It was like, that's why we use rot resistant woods. That's why we use good paints, that we don't want them peeling. And we work with manufacturers who stand by their product too. But same thing for DIYers, right? Like we've all got a life. It's like, I don't want to repaint my cabinets again, just one time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's go talk about primers because, even if we run out of time today, I think just talking about primers, good bonding primers will be really helpful to everybody who's listening. So I know we have oil-based primers, we have water-based, we have alkyd, we have shellac, we have these linseed oil primers, which I guess we'll consider that we already talked about linseed products today.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's kind of its own niche.
Yeah, because everything else is a little bit interchangeable. But I use oil-based primer a lot. You said you do, but I'd really like to know, and these alkyd primers, I guess I can, now that we've talked about alkyd paints, I can sort of catch on to what an alkyd primer is. What is shellac primer? And, I guess just maybe briefly give me an overview of the difference between oil-based, water-based, and shellac.
Yeah, so water-based primers, latex primers most people call it latex still, but it's not really latex. It's acrylic now. That's what Sherwin-Williams came up with in the 40s, their first stuff.
Good to know.
And I don't know when it made the transition to acrylic now, but it's a slight difference. But the performance is about the same. But they create like a surface coating. So the primer, you put on a latex primer and it prepares the surface to be able to have paint bond to it. Put them together, paint and bond.
Yeah.
Where you can have the paint bond well to the primer, and that primer is also good at holding on to the surface. Now, like there are drywall primers, wood primers, metal primers. Make sure you're using a primer for whatever it is you're actually painting. And in general, I don't tend to lean towards the all-purpose primers because kind of like a jack of all trades is like, if you're good at everything, then you're not a specialist at one thing. So use a wood primer for wood, a drywall primer for drywall. Find that specific primer. It's usually not as expensive as paint and well worth it too. And then so that creates latex or acrylic primers create more of like a coating on top of it. Oil-based primers, alkyd primers, they tend to penetrate more into the wood because wood is better at taking in oil. The wood, especially older woods, are very thirsty for oils, and the oil in those paints, the solvent, the mineral spirits, paint thinner, penetrates more deeply, so it brings the primer into it. And then you have the opposite end, which is a shellac primer, which is the reason you would use a shellac primer is it's really good at stain blocking. So old woods, we don't have these issues so much anymore, but like nicotine stains on stuff. Like if you're using, if you're priming or painting woods like cedar that have really heavy tannins in them, they will bleed right through a latex primer and paint. And you may not even see it. It may not happen like as you're priming and painting. It may take weeks or months even.
Okay.
I remember I was visiting Martha's Vineyard and we were eating out on this patio, which was beautiful. And they had this cedar tongue ceiling that was painted blue. And I saw every knot, which was orange, and it had bled through the paint because they used a latex primer.
Right.
And then, so latex, not so good at stain blocking, oil-based, much better. And then the ultimate is the shellac-based because it's shellac. It is just like a polyurethane or something like that. It's different. It's shellac, but it's an oil-based primer too. So you don't clean that up with mineral spirits or water. You clean it up with denatured alcohol. And it is the ultimate at stain blocking. Nothing gets through. So it's shellac with a white pigment usually. white added to it, and really nothing gets through that at all. So we use that on knot holes. Sometimes we have old window sash or doors where we'll prime it with oil, and then we'll notice that it's bleeding through. We'll come back with the shellac and touch up spots. But that's only it's interior and exterior spot treatment. It's not for fully coating exterior of things. The shellac is not. Ask me why.
Oh, why? Why, Scott? Why?
Because shellac can get warm, and then you put it outside in the sun and it has issues. It can melt off of things, especially in warmer climates. So maybe not that much of an issue in the northern climates, but down here, I've had my paint coatings melt off of windows because it was painted like a black paint here in a Florida summer, and we did shellac primer on the outside because it was bleeding, and you're like, nope, paint just kind of like melted right off of it. So follow the manufacturer's instructions. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, so disappointing. So I have a question. Actually, this is a good troubleshooting question maybe, and this might be a time to talk about it. So, sometimes you'll go by a house and you'll see, there's one in particular, and you're the shutter guy, and they have proper shutters. I'll just clarify that. Beautiful, proper shutters. It has a false thatched roof, which I think is amazing. And behind the shutters and it's a white house, has green shutters, and behind that, dripping all the way down from second story down, look like rusty, and it could just be rust, from the hinges or something. But what causes stuff it's so sad. It's a mess.
Yeah. So it may be rust. It depends on the colors of things, but you've seen, I do remember I posted something, a picture of some shutters that looked like they were just weeping down the side of the building. It looked like Tammy Faye with her mascara just running down.
This too.
Yeah. So a lot of times as paint ages, it goes, if it doesn't fail, like if you don't get bubbling or peeling or things like that, you get chalking paint, which is the natural lifespan. Don't think like your painter did a bad job or it's a bad paint, but it wears out by getting very matte finish and very chalky. And that chalkiness is all the solvent or the acrylic or anything is gone now, and you're left with the dry pigment, and it just is kind of falling apart. The paint is at the end of its life. Well, that dry pigment can start to like run down your wall if it's been a long time since you've painted it. So that's a possibility too. Or if it happened immediately, then the paint wasn't quite dry and it rained. But usually it's the chalky paint over years. Some of that pigment starts to run down there, especially if you've got like that white house with the green shutters and they haven't been painted in a while. It'll slowly you'll lose the pigment slowly but surely.
Yeah. And we have a thing here that people do. It's kind of a corner that painters cut. And that's where if they repaint a house, they'll do the front of the shutter, but they won't do the back. So the back ends up, it's already in bad shape, and then it just goes from bad to worse. And so that could very well be, that makes sense.
Yeah, it never got painted. And so now it's chalky paint and it's just running down. The paint you feel on the shutter feels great and it looks nice, great. But behind it, not so much. Yeah. Or the paint on the wall behind the shutter too, from what was there originally, the old body paint is going to be doing that same thing. So taking the shutters off to paint is always I know it takes more time, but it's always a good idea because you're just not protecting those areas of your house anymore. And the water gets back there and it doesn't dry out. So those are areas that are really prone to rot.
All right. So we have a few more minutes to talk about paint. So let's talk about I'll give you some scenarios and you can tell me maybe what would be good for you. And just note to you, I didn't write any of these scenarios down. So hopefully I'll be with it enough that I can come up with these on the fly. But
hopefully I'll come up with good answers too.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with Florida since that's where right? So what primer, and you don't have to necessarily pick a brand. You can if you have a favorite, but I guess I'm more looking for oil-based or shellac or whatever. Let's start with what type of primer and what type of paint would you use for the exterior of a window? And excluding Lindsay, let's say we're not going,
of a wood window?
Yeah.
So I would use what's called a long oil. It's basically a wood primer. It's an oil-based or an alkyd-based wood primer. And it is slow drying, 8 hours, 24 hours to recoat or so. And that way I know that I'm going to get really good penetration into the wood. I will at times use a fast dry alkyd primer, and those are like 30 minutes to an hour. And great. It just depends on the scenario, what the client's looking for, what I want to accomplish. Sometimes I don't have the ability to wait 24 hours to repaint. Like it's just a quick, can you come out and fix this? Well, sure. We'll do a little Band-Aid and it'll be fast.
So long oil primer, what do you have a favorite brand? I mean, I said you didn't have to say, but do you have one? Because I'd like to hear it.
Ben Moore makes one. Their Morehouse white. I like that. Sherwin-Williams also makes a wood primer that's a long oil. I forget the official name of it, but it's in a pink can that they make. That's their brand. I really like both of those. I've done some testing on both, and they last a good long time, and they provide a really nice base for my paint, so I don't have to worry about what's going to happen later.
Okay, so what kind of paint would you put over that?
I've used a lot of Sherwin-Williams and Ben Moore are kind of my go-to brands. I've used Behr on my own house at one point, and I was really impressed with the way that Behr held up. The only reason as a pro that I don't use Behr is I just don't have the support. Like, there's nobody to talk to. There's not a paint rep to be like, oh, you should troubleshoot here and try this maybe. It's the paint counter at Home Depot, and that's not sufficient for me.
Right.
And so Ben Moore and Sherwin-Williams provide that support. So I've used Shercryl, which is not on their, like, it's kind of hidden in the back in their industrial line. It's meant for painting wood boats. And I was like, if it can hold up to a wood boat, then it should do well here, and it has really great adhesion. It's a little sticky to deal with in your painting process, and it gums up your brushes pretty good, but it works really well longevity-wise. I've painted porches with it, and it holds up for years.
Is it a water cleanup?
It is a water cleanup.
Okay. I'll try that on my storms this summer.
Yeah, those are great. Another one we use is I particularly like, you're talking exterior, so I don't use that for the exterior. Ben Moore, what is the one that we use most of the time on here? Ultra Spec. Thank you. Had a brain cloud.
Yeah.
Ultra Spec by Ben Moore. I use that on the exterior of our windows. We were usually using Shercryl, and then we got spec that for a job, and everybody in the crew loved it. Very easy to use. The cleanup isn't quite so sticky on your brushes and things like that. Adhesion's good. And it keeps its sheen for a long time. I've noticed over the years. Great. It doesn't start chalking nearly as quickly. So I really like that one too.
Okay. So let's say, I started very specifically in Florida, but I guess let's move outside and say there's a state where you can't use an oil-based primer. So what would your second choice be?
I don't know. Are there any states where you can't use oil-based primers? I know a lot of them, you can't buy them in gallons anymore. You can buy them in quarts, which is annoying and expensive.
Yeah. Actually, now that I just said that, I realized that was kind of silly, because I think you're right. California, though. I think California you can't. But I could be wrong, and I'll check on that.
You can't buy a lot of stuff in California. It's tough.
No. But I think, yeah, exactly. I lived there for 15 years, so yeah. I didn't realize what I was missing, to tell you the truth. But I do miss California a lot, but I didn't realize just how stringent the regulations were until, I could buy spray paint off the shelf. I didn't even have to go find somebody to let me have a key to open it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that I would. So we use latex primers at times on places. I use the Ben Morehouse. They have white primer. The Ben Moore Fresh Start is one of those that we use for a latex primer. I like that. I think it's a good latex primer. I think that, so the only reason I use that is because there are times where people can't, like, time-wise, they don't want the additional expense of the long oil because it slows down our production times. We can't spray it. I mean, we could, but we need to have all kinds of different protections, and you can spray a latex rather easily. So I like that Ben Moore Fresh Start. I think it works well.
Yeah.
And that's, if I had to use a latex primer on wood, that's probably the only one that I feel comfortable with using right now. But I would still go with, if you want a longer performance, I would go with an oil. I think right now that's just where it still is technology-wise for paint.
Okay. All right. All right. That's pretty good then. So let's go interior. How about interior? Let's assume that we kind of have similar choices across the board, because a lot of people have HVAC, which kind of keeps their interior, kind of standard, whether you're in Florida or wherever.
So those same paints that I was talking about could be used inside. They work fine for that. There's a couple more options on the interior. Probably my favorite interior paint for any woodwork or windows is Ben Moore Impervo. It is an alkyd. It's an oil-based paint. But I have not seen anything that gives such a nice, smooth finish as that. It covers really well. The satin Impervo in particular, that brand, that sheen, when you paint it on, it looks glossy. So some people might be turned off and like, but after a week, it settles into its proper sheen. And it's just, I think that's like that's been their flagship, Benmore, for years. And it's one of the few oil-based paints they have not gotten rid of because it's just so good. And it holds up so well.
Oil-based. Gotcha.
It's an oil-based paint. Yeah, Benmore in Pervo.
Okay, so do you like the advanced line if people cannot get oil-based paint?
I do. That would be my next preference is for Benmore's version. I like the advanced line of paints. Those are really nice. Sherwin-Williams' version of that is Pro Classic.
Mm-hmm. Or Emerald, right?
Well, Emerald has, I'm not sure if they have an acrylic alkyd on that, but Emerald is their top of the line, just overall paint inside and out, which I really like too. That's a very nice paint, very expensive paint too.
Yeah.
But I really like their Pro Classic acrylic alkyd. That's same thing as advanced. And it goes on like water cleanup and everything, but then it lays down like an oil-based. So it's really nice in that vein. And I've done the trim work in my own house with that. That was right before they came out with advanced. I was using that. So, and it's held up well for the last 12 years or so.
I painted a bathroom in the Pro Classic, and it's great. It really is.
Yeah.
Little tricky to use at first because it doesn't, you can overdo it really easily. You just have to kind of put it on and commit rather than trying to go over it with the brush.
Acrylic alkyd or because they make an oil-based Pro Classic, they make an acrylic alkyd and they make a water-based. So you have the options.
Interesting. I can see the label. I always thought I was using the acrylic alkyd, but now I'll have to go read my label. See, now I've learned so much from you already. And I'm curious because I feel like I haven't heard a lot of these names before, whether as a professional, do the professional paint lines have different names than the ones that a DIYer can get off the shelf? Do you have any idea or should they be the same?
They don't have different lines, but I've noticed like if you go into a Sherwin-Williams or a Benmore rep store, they'll have the ones out there that you can look at that are their like homeowner friendly ones that they've recommended. But then behind the counter, there's a whole world of paints that are there that the professionals get, which I don't think it's really duplicitous of them, but it seems silly. They're like, well, here's this, and here's Sherwin-Williams HGTV brand and this brand and Emerald and things like that. But there's a whole bunch of stuff behind the counter back in the storeroom that they don't really advertise so much. That Sherwin-Williams maybe 10 or 20 years ago, they were like, here's what we love. But now they've replaced it with new ones. They're always upping their formulas and things like that. But I still, there are a lot of painters who are like, I'm accustomed to using this. This was one of my favorites, so I stick with it. And just like anything, it's what you're familiar with. There's a lot of painters that won't try Emerald because it's a new paint. They're like, I've used super paint for 30 years and it's fine. And unless they have problems with it, they usually don't have a need to switch.
Right. Right. That's true.
But I've painted houses with Emerald, with super paint, with resilience, which they're top three, and duration. And I like all of them. I'm not a fan of super paint or duration for windows and doors because it's really sticky. It's great for the body of the house. It's really flexible, so you paint your siding with it. It's wonderful. But if you try and paint windows and doors, I did a couple and they just glued themselves shut immediately.
Right. Ugh, that would be miserable. Well, and I find it interesting. Sometimes as a homeowner, it can be a little daunting walking into these paint stores because you tell them, you're like, oh, I want this. And they're like, I don't know that you want that. And you're like, you know what? I do know I want that. Thank you very much.
Actually, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I have this conversation a lot and I have it everywhere. I'm trying to decide whether it's personal or whether it's just like how they're trained to talk to other people. But I have found that's why I was asking you about the paint names and whether this was a trade thing or whether this was a homeowner, because I can almost prepare myself for the conversation that I would have. And I'm coming across very negatively, and that's not exactly what I mean. It's like, what is it? If you know what they're going to say, then you can plan what you want to say.
Right.
So when I hear myself going in and asking for these brands, they'll be like, no, I don't really think you want that one. Well, maybe I do. Yeah.
Because homeowners don't buy the Shercryl. I've had a couple people from my blog that have gone out and bought it, and they're like, why? They're asking them the same question. Like, why do you want that? Because it's part of their industrial coatings setup. And they're like, you're a homeowner looking for the industrial and marine coating for painting wood boats. Are you really painting a wood boat? Like,
right.
Well, no, but I know I want that. Well, I think you'd be happier with the stuff that 90% of our customers, of our homeowners buy. And maybe you've been pointed in the wrong direction for this. So I think that's pretty common on there. And same thing like with the Impervo, I've had people go in and say, I want this. And they're like, oh, you mean this version, the water-based one? And they're like, no, this. They're like, why do you want, are you sure? Because nobody buys that anymore other than these pros who have been painting for 40 years. They're like, well, I want to try this. It's an old-fashioned paint, and I want to see how it works. So, it's just something that they don't get asked all the time. So when you ask to see behind the curtain, they're like, why? How do you know that there's stuff behind the curtain?
Right. Who told you about that?
Yeah.
Who sent you?
We're not supposed to talk about that.
The private paint collection for
yes.
the painting elite.
Yes. It's like the off-menu stuff when you go to the restaurant. You're like, I know you've got that special dish that you don't tell anybody about. You're like, it's the same way at the paint store. There's always something that they keep in the back just for the special people who know about it, but they're not going to tell you or market it.
Right. Oh, that's funny. Okay. Well, I'm going to link all of this on the show notes. When I listen to this and put this episode together too, then I'll write all these brands down, try to link them all so everybody can see them. I might have some behind the scenes questions for you just to make sure that I'm linking the right thing, that kind of thing.
And I'll preface it by saying that, well, this isn't really a preface because it's after it, and afterward to say that these are the paints that I use, which doesn't mean that they're the right paints for everybody else to use. It's just paints that I've used and I like. And I really think painting is largely personal preference. If you do the right thing of proper paint prep, you put a proper primer down and you paint well, that's really what it's about. There are hundreds of paints out there that will do just fine in most things. And I just haven't had the opportunity to test every single paint out there. Of the ones I've used, these are my favorites.
Okay. Yeah. And as far as scenarios go, I think we talked about interior, exterior. That's fine. Let's spend just a minute and a half, 2 minutes talking about painting water-based paints over oil and how we can make those bond together. And then we'll move on. And I've got a different topic. So
yeah. So if you're unsure, I'll say if it's oil-based, you absolutely need to prime with an oil-based primer. That's the biggest challenge. So if you prime with an oil-based primer, that will bond to an oil-based paint or to a latex paint. If you put a latex primer on top of oil, it's just going to peel right off. It's going to be real easy to take off. Or if you put a latex paint on top of an oil-based paint, it's going to peel off too. So if you want to be sure, and a lot of people, you can go through this testing thing of let's see if it's oil-based or latex. I don't care to spend the time to do it. It's like, I'm just going to use an oil-based primer and then I don't have to worry about, oh, I thought it was latex, but I was wrong. It was like, so an oil-based primer, and then you can put on top of an oil-based primer, you can put latex or oil, no problem at all. Same thing with a shellac. You can put latex or oil, not a problem at all. You just, as far as primers go, you can only put a latex paint on top of a latex primer. You don't want to try and mix and match in that way.
Right. So if I have oil paint, I can also, and I'm interior because we talked about the pitfalls of exterior use for shellac, but I could use a shellac primer on top of oil paint and then cover that with, is that what you said? Or did I misunderstand
You
that?
could. Yes, you could, but I would recommend you didn't unless you're having stain bleed through. It's really smelly. Really the only time to use that is for when you're having bleed through. It's very expensive too. You're talking like $50 or $60 a gallon compared to $20 or $30 a gallon for other primers. So the shellac base should be like a targeted, surgical kind of strike in those areas where you're having problems of bleed through, of tannin bleed or something else, stains. You want to cover up water stains. Things like that are great for shellac primers. They're just expensive and difficult to use because of the alcohol cleanup.
Right. Okay. That makes total sense. I just wanted to know because I see sometimes people using it, and that always did feel to me like killing a fly with a hatchet. It felt like a lot of product for maybe the return
the
you could get from something else. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. All right. That's great. I am having that scenario play out across my grand staircase in my foyer. I did not do that. I did not paint the latex over oil. I just need to make that clear. But that is a situation that I'm responsible for taking care of now. And, sometimes that latex can last a while, but it will always fail. Always fail.
It doesn't have the scuff and abrasion resistance that normal paint. And if you put it on a door or a window, it's going to come off very quickly. The blocking, it's just going to start peeling.
Yeah. I've had the wackiest thing. I take my Cobra infrared paint remover and all I have to do is just point it at that and it doesn't even bubble. It just cracks.
It jumps off.
Yeah. And jumps off and like, well, thank you for that gift. At least I don't have to work so hard trying to get rid of it.
This is wonderful. I like it for paint stripping purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, this is great. This has been super helpful, I think, to just kind of have a chance to really talk about all these things. I hope that listeners, I mean, I probably should have advised them to get a piece of paper and a pencil out before we even started. Maybe they'll need to rewind, go back and
that's the great thing about podcasts. Jump back. Yeah,
exactly. Listen to this as much as you want. This has been great. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while, and you're just the right person to have it. So
paint's how you finish it, right? I mean, you do all that hard work to get everything repaired and restored, and then you put a bad paint job on top, and it makes it look bad. It's like just take your time to learn, the right way to do paint prep and do your paint application, right? My grandfather, I don't know if you've heard like paint keys called church keys. Have you heard that phrase?
I don't think so. No.
So they some painters that I've worked with around here that are now retired, but they would call it a church key. And I asked them once, I was like, why do you call it a church key? And because they're like, it's like going to church on Sunday. He's like, the rest of the week, you work hard, it's miserable, you're exhausted. And then when you get that key, you get to open the can and it's like going to church. That's the great part. That's what makes the whole week worth it, is you get to go and you put the paint on because you've done all the hard work. So it was like going to church for them.
Oh, that's great. And I do know what a paint key is now. I was confused at first when you were talking about what that meant, but
they would call it, they wouldn't call it the paint key. They call it a church key. And I thought it was kind of funny. I was like, I don't understand this reference at all. I'd never heard it. And they explained it. I was like, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because it is really, when you get to that point to paint, you're like, finally.
Yeah. It's so satisfying. Yeah. So satisfying.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, I'll link all of this on the show notes and everything and make it really easy, hopefully, for people to refer to the information again. Cool. But the other thing I wanted to talk about completely, it's not really unrelated. It's all related. Everything we talk about here is related, but something I'm really excited about that you are doing, which is you've recorded a giant window restoration course that people can buy and learn how to restore their windows from start to finish. And I want to hear your take on it. I have access to the course, so I've been able to see it, and I'm just so impressed. It's nice to have it all in one place. And so tell me all about it. Tell me what you got.
Yeah. I mean, prior to COVID, I was going out and teaching workshops a lot, and we'd invite people in here to our shop to teach them how to restore their windows. And I realized it's just not possible right now. And my mission has always been the idea of trying to democratize window restoration. I want it to be available and approachable by people. And so I've written all these posts and done videos here and there. And I went, you know what? I really need to kind of supplement the books that I've written on it, Old Windows Made Easy and Old Windows in Depth, that I was like, people are always asking, if you could just show me, rather than like a picture and some instructions, how you're doing that and what works well, and kind of troubleshoot some of the stuff. And so I thought, you know what, this is a good time. I'm not doing any of these workshops. I'm going to pour that time into walking through a whole window restoration here in my shop and on site, and pay money to get a good videographer to come in here and edit it and put it all together so that you can watch me work step by step through a restoration of a double hung window. And so we've got everything from like how to pull it, window anatomy, how to pull the windows out. We put quizzes at the end of the chapters so you can make sure you're remembering the important stuff. We talk about obviously paints and primers, glass, and we walk you through. I walk you through. It's me talking to you the whole time in different lessons. There's 20 something lessons, hours of video, and probably to walk through the whole thing would take you about if you sat down for a whole day and read it and watched the videos, it would be a 10 to 12 hour day, I think, by the time you're done with it. But I like that you could have something where you get this access to this course and you can come back and be like, hold on, I need to look at the glazing chapter again, the lesson on glazing. What did he do there? And you can watch me work through it all, instead of a page or two in a book that talks about it with a couple pictures, which are helpful. But I think video is just, it's 2021. Video is the way to communicate stuff, especially doing, how do I do this? How do I do that? Show me. Well, that's what I tried to put together, was a way that you could show people how to do it. And that way people can also do this without having to work with me personally. It's more scalable. I can have people taking this class. Right now, there's 30 something people in the class going through, and they get a private Facebook group where myself, my brother, a few other people, Allison Hardy from Window Woman is in there too, and there are professionals in there answering questions too about their window as they run into the stuff that they're like, hey, this isn't actually covered in the course. This is a weird thing that has anybody seen this before? So we kind of put that Facebook group together that they get access to, that they can ask questions and share their wins and losses and stuff like that as they work through it.
So who is this course geared to? Who would this course benefit?
I geared it towards beginners and DIYers. So anybody, if you're a homeowner, if you own an old house, I was like, these are the people I want to teach. I mean, that's who I teach on the blog. Not saying that professionals can't benefit from it. There have been a few professional companies that were like, we'd like to use this as kind of our onboarding for getting people started, because nobody, and for me too, that's what we use. It's our onboarding for new people. The first day they sit down and go through the course so they can learn how to do epoxy, how to scrape windows, how to deal with hardware, all the kinds of things, the mechanicals, ropes, all that. And they've used it there. But I think if you're a homeowner, a DIYer, even if you've got had one student who was like, I want to restore the windows. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to have my contractor do it, but I'm going to buy the course for him so that he can go through it and he can restore my windows, because there's nobody in my town that restores windows and I need them done. And I was like, that's a great use of it for anybody who, knows how to swing a hammer in the slightest, can learn how to do this stuff.
Right. Absolutely. And I do know, people sometimes get daunted by a price of something. But when I looked at the price of your course, which we will link to, in the show notes too, I'm thinking it's still less than having a professional restore your window. And that's one window.
Right.
So what if you have 12? What if you have 15? What if you have 142, like someone I know who lives where I live?
Oh my goodness.
They're not all double hung, but basically it's all...
It's still a lot of windows.
It's all the same. Yeah.
Wow.
I can apply the principles of restoration to all of the windows that I have in this house. Yeah, it's insanity. It really is. But so, yeah, I think the return on your investment comes pretty quickly, rather than looking at it as a one-time, you have this one-time cost for basically a lifetime of window restoration help.
And that's what we were trying to position. I mean, we even set up like a quick study thing for $149. It was like, if you think you can do all this in 30 days, you can jump in, you can get it. You don't get all the benefits because we're constantly adding new content to it too, because there's always something new to learn. Like I just added something on cutting laminated glass the other day. But that you can just do it in 30 days and be like, okay, I know what I need. You can get in, get out, and be done. But for the rest of it, it's $597, or you can get another one that's another $200 where you get a couple hours from one of the people who work for me that are like one of our project leads to walk through with you for those like specific issues. But that's how we tried to position it. I was like, if we're like half the cost of restoring one window professionally, which it's actually a little bit less than that, then, 10, 20 windows for $600 roughly, I was like, that saves you tens of thousands of dollars. And we've referred some clients who are like, we can't afford you. It's too expensive. It's like, well, then go through the class.
Yeah.
If you really want to do it yourself. And some people are like, absolutely. Especially in these days, who are like working from home. If you've got the ability, people get tired of seeing their windows when they work from home. I've noticed there's been so much home improvement just in general done by people this past year compared to years past when they could escape to work for 40 hours a week.
Right.
Now it's like, I'm stuck looking at this stuff and these don't look as attractive as I want them to.
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, it can be a huge money saver.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Where can they find this class? This is through Teachable. Is that correct?
Yeah, we set it up through Teachable. So you kind of set up your own login and you can go in and it's self-paced. And you can find it. You can just go to the craftsmanblog.com.
Okay.
And up at the top, there is a menu for courses. And it's called DIY Window Restoration. Or if you're on Instagram, it's in my bio there. The link is in the bio for it.
All right. Absolutely. So, which I'll link. I'll link Instagram. I'll link the Craftsman blog, your course, all this paint stuff. I think I've said that like 5 times during this episode, but
But
just
are
so
you going to
know,
put links in the show notes though?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. I think I will. Yeah, good idea. I think I will put links in the show notes.
You could put links in the show notes if you want. I think that would be helpful too.
I could put some links in the show notes. Okay. Let's
go that direction.
Okay. All right. Well, Scott, always a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for coming today, sitting down with me. I hope to one day see you in person again and we can restore some windows together. That would be great. All right.
So much fun. Yeah, always good talking with you, and look forward to the next time.
All right, great. Thanks. I got one more thing to say, and that is thank you for listening to today's episode. Be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. And for more information about this episode, including show notes, transcripts, merchandise, and to sign up for the monthly newsletter, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.